So the good news is that when you look at reform, UK business does actually have lots of things that they think can be and should be reformed to help not just Britain, but the European Union. In my view, of all the things I've mentioned, is about changing the mindset, it's about addressing the issue between the Eurozone and the non-Eurozone, it's about making the single market work, and it's about restoring the independence of UK courts in areas relevant to the UK. Third and finally, if we were to leave, some people are horrified by this very thought, but as part of the analysis for Boris, we did longer-term forecasts. Now, if you were to compare leaving with staying in Europe, and if you were to make that comparison over a 2, 3, 4-year period, the reality is all economic forecasts, and I do mean all, would show that staying in Europe is preferable. But that's because if you decided to leave, or if we decided to leave, it's like a V shape. There's an initial shock, uncertainty rises. It's a bit like the Scottish debate. There is uncertainty ahead of any potential change. International firms would be wary of what was about to happen. But when you actually do a forecast over a longer time period, say over 20 years, to get the ups and downs of economic cycles, what we found was that while the best scenario would be to be in a reformed EU, a very, very, very close second was to leave, and to actually leave and pursue sensible economic policies. And that was far better than being in an unreformed European Union. It's not just about being in or out, it's also about what you do if you're in and what you do if you're out. So to conclude, I would say that we should actually be positive. If we can reform the European Union, then we should stay. But if you're at all sceptical about the ability of reforming the European Union, I would say leaving, and clearly we have to determine the relationship if we leave, and we clearly have to adopt sensible policies if we leave. Leaving may not be that bad, provided it helps, coming back to the initial point, position UK economy and UK business in this changing and growing global economy. Thank you.
The European model is not fundamentally a 21st century entrepreneurial innovation model of economic growth. It is essentially has its roots in a post-war and corporatist, pretty statist model of European reconstruction, which in all sorts of ways, which Vicky is extremely fluent in describing because she's battling against it on our behalf daily, is not fit for purpose to unleash the great talents of this great European civilization in this context of that world market. And we have a whole series of structures, regulations, practices. It goes right to the heart of the governance structure of Europe, which are problematic. And my first point is that we have to somehow build a European model that is fundamentally more entrepreneurial and more embracing of innovation to release the talents of the people and businesses here.
And one of the things we want to avoid is to be over-regulated. I'm not against regulation, but over-regulated as a European business. We are still a proud British company, but some of the rules and regulations that we have to operate to add burdens to our business that frankly our competitors don't see on a global basis, and some of them in Europe are, dare I say, slightly better at managing how they respond to those regulations relative to some of the British companies. So what we felt we needed to do, we came up with a number of principles, and one which has been picked up is one in, one out. So if a new regulation's coming in, a regulation has to go out before that regulation could go through the EU. Remarkable thing to do. Frankly, it's something as I'm going to say a trader, an entrepreneur, I've done in my business. Nobody in my companies is allowed to introduce a new rule or a regulation or a piece of paper without taking, I sometimes demand 2, but certainly 1 out, because you cannot avoid this burden of regulation that comes in even to small businesses. So when I saw that sort of thing happening within the task force, I became quite enthusiastic.
So why is it so difficult to deliver some of these reforms? Sometimes we need to think a bit harder where the laws come from. And this is what I call self-inflicted injuries. Okay? Often these laws, which business hates so much, have not been dreamt up in some ivory tower in Brussels, but actually They started as a campaign in the UK, and part of the reason I wanted to stand up is, you know, I sit on the right, other people sit on the left. All the time in the European election when I was saying we need to have flexibility on the employment laws and we don't want the financial transaction tax, my Labour MEP, who also represents the East of England, said, isn't Europe great? It's given us things like the Agency Workers Directive and now we're going to get this financial transaction tax. Self-inflicted injuries. These campaigns are left-right campaigns. Don't just assume that if we walked away from Europe, the Labour left in the UK wouldn't put those back in the UK.